All right, picking up from where we left off, we were just saying that this area has a huge amount of primary economic activity. And so when the prices of those commodities is not very high, as is true right now and has been true in many cases for the last few years, that affects the economy of this area. And in fact, most of the economies in this region, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, many of them, the economies are currently weak. And part of that is because there's been so much reliance on primary sector activities. Part of it is that the region has continued to struggle since the fall of the Soviet Union and that transition to new systems. And many places have not fully been able to diversify or stabilize their economy. Another reason that economies are weak at the moment, particularly in Russia, is that Russia has a large number of sanctions on it at the moment because of the way that they have been acting in places like Georgia and in Ukraine. So other governments are trying to make Russia curtail the way that it is acting to stop them from being so aggressive. And one of the tools that the international community uses is sanctions, which means that Russia is not able to sell its products, especially things like oil, on the international market as much as they would like to. There are countries that are refusing to buy products from Russia. And that is one of the reasons that Putin has been fairly aggressive lately, because he would really like to have those sanctions dropped. But all of these pieces together are some of the reasons that the economy is currently weak in this region. Democracy is also shaky in a number of places. There have been a lot of charges about corrupt elections in places like Belarus, in Ukraine, and in Russia. In fact, at the moment, the head of the opposition party in Russia, and overall in this region, opposition parties are suppressed and repressed. The head of the opposition in Russia has been imprisoned again. Alexei Navalny recently returned to the country after being out of the country, recovering from being poisoned. The charge is that the government of Russia and Putin's regime are the ones who poisoned him. The Putin regime denies that, but there's some pretty strong evidence that they are the ones who poisoned him. He returned to his country to continue to try to work to end these issues and to open democracy up more, and he has been re-imprisoned on some fairly trumped up charges. So democracy is shaky in places. There's also a lot of corruption. It's a widespread problem at all levels, everything from local to national, and we will talk about some aspects of that corruption in later sections of this lecture when we talk about the Russian mafia. Okay? So we've got weak economies, we've got shaky democracy, there's a lot of political turmoil, there's all sorts of other pieces where there's a lot of people who would like to leave. And in fact, the population is shrinking because of these widespread problems and all of this tumult and all of this conflict. So the population is shrinking because people are leaving, they are exiting, which is called emigration with an E. We'll talk more about that in population. And people are also having fewer children because they don't have the money, they're worried about politics, they're worried about the environment. There's a lot of reasons that the population in this region is shrinking overall. So there's a lot of challenges here. We also have an interesting east-west pull and conflict. Many of these countries have looked east for a very long time. Remember, this is called the Russian domain, right? Russia has been very dominant politically. And these were pieces of the former Soviet Union. So there were very strong economic ties to the east, to Russia. Well, now a number of them, places like Moldova and Ukraine particularly, are much more interested in looking to the east and perhaps joining the EU, in creating more trade agreements and more political connections to Europe rather than to Russia. And Russia is not excited about that at all. Russia wants to maintain its dominance in this area. They want access to Ukrainian markets and Ukrainian products and Ukrainian land. And so there is this very strong split and pull between East and West. You can see that pretty clearly with this map here. This is a map of an election a few years ago. The orange candidate was a very pro-Western candidate, and the blue candidate was very pro-Russia. And you can see it's not just an east-west looking kind of attitude, it is east-west of the country. So that is very characteristic of this region. There's a lot of pull between the east and the west in many of these places. Similar things are happening in Belarus at the moment. The man who is in charge is not interested in moving more towards Western connections. He has very strong ties to Russia, and the people there are protesting the way his government works and wanting to have more choice and more democracy. Another place where there's a lot of political turmoil is in the Caucasus, in two places called Chechnya and Dagestan. Don't worry about the spelling right now. You'll get them, the spelling when we go into them with a little bit more detail. But there's a lot of political conflict in the Caucasus. There's political conflict between the East and the West. And last semester, things got pretty hot in this area. Another piece of the Caucasus, just to the south of Chechnya and Dagestan, this border between Azerbaijan and Armenia here, this area, this district called Nagorno-Karabakh, it is something called an enclave, and we will get more into detail about that in geopolitics. But this is an area where Armenia and Azerbaijan were going to war last semester. So overall, this is an area with a lot of geopolitical complexity. And we have a whole lot of stuff to talk about. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, I'm going to pause here, and then we will come back and label the map.